Our guest this week for Touch Basin's Hole is Korean-Australian Bo Seo, who is a two-time world debate champion. He's also the former coach of the Australian national debating team, as well as the Harvard College Debating Union. Based on his experiences and what his debate skills have taught him about life, he has written a book published early this year called Good Arguments, or in the UK, I believe he has a different title, The Art of Disagreeing Well. I'm delighted to say that he joins us via video today. Mr. Seo, welcome to the show.
안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. It's an honor to be on this program. Thank you.
Yes, 안녕하세요. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today. Your book starts with you talking about how you moved to Australia from South Korea when you were just 8 years old. You spoke no English at the time. Can you tell our listeners a bit more about that story and how you ended up joining a debate club in the first place?
The first thing I learned when I moved from South Korea to Australia is that the hardest part of crossing language lines is adjusting to real-life conversation, and that the hardest conversations to adjust to are disagreements. That's when passions run and the rhythms of ordinary speech start to break down and people start to interrupt. And that, coupled with the sense that my differences from my peers, if exposed, could mark me out as a bit of an outsider, that made me resolve to be very agreeable, to nod and smile and keep most of my thoughts to myself. And the thing that broke me out of that posture of conflict aversion was a promise that my fifth grade teacher made me, which was that in debate, when one person speaks, no one else does. And to someone who had been spoken over and interrupted and spun out of conversation, that sounded pretty irresistible. And I took up that opportunity and joined the team.
Right, so it helped you find your voice at a time when you found it difficult, especially in a second language. Was debate then something you enjoyed right from the beginning?
I enjoyed that opportunity to be heard from the beginning, but there is still a process because it's not just being heard in the way that you might be heard if you're public speaking or something like that, or if you're just given a platform to speak. You're still disagreeing with someone. And that requires not only that bit of silence and that platform, but it also requires a set of skills that's going to back you up, that you can rely on, so that when we're at our most vulnerable, which is disagreeing with someone, we have something that we can rely on.
In those early days, what did you take away from that experience in debate, and how did that help you as you grew older, as you went through school and as you went through uni and started to build a career as well?
There's a book about that. I think the first is that disagreeing is a skill. It's not something that just visits upon us like a natural disaster. It's something that we should prepare for, that we should work on as a craft, as a kind of an art. And those skills are transferable to all those different arenas of life that you spoke about, right? The gathering information and marshalling evidence and putting it in the form that's going to be most persuasive is what we do at school. It's what we do in the workplace. It's what we have to do in the home sometimes. It's certainly what we do when we engage with the political sphere. So I think the first is a view of disagreement as a skill and not just as a kind of an event. And I think the second thing I would say is once you've made that jump, you can start to see disagreement as something more than just a source of pain and division. That the best disagreements have a kind of richness. They call for a growth that sitting around the circle, agreeing with one another, can't really hope to achieve. So I think even at that young age, I was circling around something that I think is really truthful about the human condition, which is we show ourselves most fully. We push ourselves to grow in unexpected ways um, when we look at our differences head on and we step into conversation about them.
So, even just speaking to you for a couple of minutes now, it seems that you have a very philosophical take on debate and arguing and disagreements. And I'm guessing that's what led you to write your book, Good Arguments, that you wanted to share what you've learnt and try to help people. Is that what was behind the thinking behind the book?
There was something philosophical about it. I mean, debate to me is an answer to a really ancient question, which is what do we do about the fact that we're all different, but we have to coexist? And debate isn't the only answer to that question, but I think it's one useful contribution. And I wanted in the book to bridge as much as possible um, that philosophical insight or that discussion with things that people can practically do. Because even though I'm speaking about it in a kind of elevated way, um, at the end of the day, this is an activity that we do as children. And so I wanted readers to be able to learn the lessons in a way that would be digestible, practical, something they could implement. But I don't want to trivialize um, an activity by saying it's what children do, because in fact, I think
Sure.
they are circling around, um, these themes that go to the essence of who we are and what it means to live with one another.
What triggered you to actually make the decision to write the book? I understand there was a political event that really pushed you over to actually making the decision to write this book.
I think there were two triggers for my wanting to write this book. The first is I won the World Championships a second time, the University's World Championships in January 2016. And I was first approached to write this book then. And if I wrote it then, it would have been about helping people discover their voice, right? To be able to make their case, to be heard. All of those things are really important. And I thought perhaps if I could say something useful about that, help someone with that, that would be time well spent. So that would be the first impetus. But the second one, and the one that was quite formative for how this book turned out, was what happened several months after I won the World Championships, which was the US presidential campaign between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And what you saw in that incredibly divisive moment in American history was that the debates where the two candidates came face to face became not only a symbol for this era of polarization that it helped usher in or to reveal, but it also became a driver of that. So we saw the debate stage being hijacked in such a way that degraded the public conversation rather than enhanced it. And so that pushed me to think not only about debate as a set of skills that can be passed on, but also an opportunity to reflect on what we want our disagreements to do for us and what the limits and uses of disagreement might be.
Right, so it's essentially the divisiveness, the polarization that we were seeing in politics that perhaps called on you to write this book and to try and essentially help and give back to people as well what you've learned. Your book is part memoir, part advice on competitive debate, but also on how to deal with everyday arguments and disagreements in everyday conversation, relationships and education, even technology as well, I understand. We, of course, encourage our listeners and viewers to seek out the book to learn more about what you want to teach us. But Perhaps what is the one kernel of advice that you can give us today? You talk about how the divisiveness you saw in the world led you to write this book. How can debate help us, especially if you are even afraid of engaging or it seems too daunting?
One of the things that makes disagreements daunting is the sense that it can run away from us, right? We wade into it, and all of a sudden, um, kind of like a whirlwind, it starts pulling in all these other disputes. It gets bigger, the volume starts increasing, and so on. And I think one bit of advice that might help with that is that every disagreement should start with some agreement. And that's most fundamentally what we're agreeing about, right? So when we say we're arguing today about whose turn it is to do the laundry, right? That's all we're arguing about. We're not
Hmm.
arguing about what happened last week and um, how you looked at me the other day. All of those other things, we can get to that, but for now, we're going to talk about this
Hmm.
particular subject, and we're also going to agree to conduct our disagreement in certain ways and not others. So we're going to take turns when we speak. So we're not interrupting each other. We're going to give each other an equal amount of time to be heard in this exchange, right? And so um, I would start every disagreement with that little period of negotiation. And just in terms of how you framed the question, which I think is quite right, I mean, the book came out of a desire to be useful in this time. And for me, the day to day disagreements of how we conduct our conversations around the kitchen table, in the office conference room, those things are not disconnected from our political moment, right? And it is, in fact, what I think we can do as individuals, in addition to all the other institutional, structural things we're going to have to do to try and unsettle um, some of the worst tendencies that I think are tending to dominate our public conversations.
I understand that there are plans for your book to be published in Korea in Korean. Can you tell us about that? And what do you hope Korean readers take away from the book as well? Is there anything different that you think they can take away from it?
I'm so excited for the book to come out, and it's being translated now, and it should be some number of months before Munak Dongne publishes it on that side. And I feel really very honored to work with one of the great publishers of the world, and not just of Korea. I see it as a homecoming for me. In some ways, though the story starts um, as a story of immigration,
Hmm.
a lot of my values and outlooks are shaped by my parents who are Korean and by my childhood, just growing up in Seoul. And in some ways, Korea, because it's a divided country, because it's a country surrounded, right, by kind of regional powers with a history of conflict. Um, there's no way of running away from this,
Sure.
which is the project that we have to be involved in, which is finding better ways to manage our differences. So I'm very excited to see how readers receive it. It's a learned culture, it's a scholarly culture, so I think there'll be an interest from just the education element of it too. But I think that theme of finding better ways to disagree, I think Koreans are no strangers to, and I'm looking forward to engaging in conversation about that when I get there.
Do you think Korean people debate or argue any differently? Korean politics is also very polarized as well, of course. I'm not sure if you've seen the political debates here in Korea.
I do watch it a little bit. I mean, I think the first thing is it feels like the passions are very alive in our day-to-day conversations, and they reveal themselves with a fullness, maybe more so than I see in some other countries. And I think the other thing maybe about disagreement in Korea is it feels quite democratic in some way, which is a lot of people do it a lot. And and there's a lot of conversation,
Hmm.
and I think where there's conversation, there's hope, and it's a matter of trying to do it better.
And very briefly, what's next for you? I'm sure you're very busy with the release of this book, but I understand you are also a student at Harvard Law School as well now. So it seems you're looking to make debate part of your career.
Yes, I think that's right. It is a different form of debate and a different language of arguing, and I'm really enjoying learning that and seeing the differences between the background that I bring and the one that I'm entering into. And I'm hoping, I'm a believer that arguing requires the best of you. Um, that it's a vote of confidence in the best of the other side. And in some ways, the legal system is premised on those ideas. So that's the phase of my career that I'm going into.
Well, I must say it's been fascinating to talk to you today. We really appreciate your time. We've been speaking to Paul Seo, the author of Good Arguments, which is out now in English and coming soon in Korean as well. Mr. Seo, thank you once again for your time.
Thank you so much. It's an enormous honor, and I enjoyed the conversation.